Hey everybody. Hey everybody. Hello, Shadow Star Ace. Cindy. Oh, from Nevada. How you doing? Sending you so much love. Hey, as everybody comes on, please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Hello, y'all. Even if you don't show up over here, I see you. I see you. Please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. I am on Blue Sky at santitajackson.bsky.social. I'm still on X at Santita J, at Santita J, and Santita Jackson and friends. I'm running out of breath, everybody. Everybody tries to become my friend, and I love you at Santita Jackson, but I can only accept friends at Santita Jackson and friends. So let's get to it, everybody. I've got one of my favorite people. He didn't even know that he was with us today. Stand right by. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you, joining people, you all joining from everywhere, and indeed from around the world. And I'm so glad that you're really taking a peek into what we're talking about. We try to give you real talk here on the Santita Jackson Show. I want you to meet me on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. My morning stars over there. Shadow Star Ace is first from Nevada. How you doing, sweetie? It's wonderful to see you. And please go to Blue Sky. I can't believe that I'm on yet another platform. Yes, I'm catching up into the century, everybody. At santitajackson.bsky.social. Please become my friend there. I just joined a couple of days ago and you all are coming on over and I'm really excited about it. I'm on X at Santita J, at Santita J, the Santita Jackson and Friends page. I'm also sharing this with someone I know, Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr.'s page. That's right. And so let's get to it. So much has happened in the last 24 hours. So much. I mean, we've got Netanyahu who's gone to court in his corruption case. We're going to talk about that much later in a few hours. But then we looked at the Sonia Massey case, the young Black woman in Springfield who thought she heard a prowler outside of her home. Somehow she ended up dead as she was saying to the police officer, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." He just shot and killed her in cold blood. And her family appealed for him not to be released pre-trial. He was released. And so there's that. Then we've got, oh my goodness, we've got so much. We've got the Daniel Penny in New York. What happened? He was completely exonerated. We got to talk about that. And all the scales of justice are not even. We're going to even talk about it in this case with how Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old Ivy Leaguer, a brilliant student, actually. He comes out of one of the top high schools, prep schools in the country, Gilman in Baltimore. But he also graduated from UPenn, master's in engineering, undergraduate and master's degree. And he had a surfing accident that really wreaked havoc with his back. Was profoundly injured. And it turns out he's had interactions with the health insurance industry, even though he is from affluence. The interactions have left him angered, and they left many people angered. I will never, ever say that it is right to murder anyone. The first commandment is, "Thou shalt not kill." You don't do that. That having been said, we're such a violent society that sadly we get people's attention when someone's life is lost. And that's very painful to admit, but that is where we are. And I pray that we will continue to advance. And so I've got my friend here. He was with us just a few days ago. And in fact, he's someone who's worked with my father, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and other progressive leaders down through the years, John Canham Klein. Of course, he writes for FAIR. And now that he is no longer with Unite Here, at least full time. You never leave the union. You know
That's true.
you
That's true. You
come on,
never leave the union.
you stay in the movement forever and ever and ever. And that's how you and my father have linked up, doing that union work. But he's a brilliant writer, a brilliant writer. And I said, I want everyone to please begin to support these independent voices. We're seeing more and more people are turning away from legacy media, corporate media, because they want people who really speak where we are. That's what we saw. We saw that reflected in the election. There is a lived experience that we have that we need to see reflected in journalism, that we need to see reflected in opinion pieces that are fact based. What you can't negotiate are the facts. Your conclusions, of course. And so I want you to go to his Substack. It's a wonderful, wonderful platform where people, you have a lot of opinions, but healing and stealing. I told my father about his Substack and he cracked up. And it was like a rueful laugh. And then he said, but this is a platform for our time, healing and stealing, because that is what is happening. And he's written a piece, Guns and Letters, American Murder Weapons, How United Health Group Harms Patients Without Firearms. And we have to think about that because I have a feeling that this trial with Mr. Mangione, and it seems that he really, really wanted to go to trial. He wanted to be found. And the McDonald's where he was found, they are getting threats. People are saying, wait a minute, there are rats in that McDonald's, they're snitches, and so don't go there. I contended all along, John Canham Klein, that I said he's being hidden. He's had a lot of space for a few days to be able to move. And it turns out there were some mistakes that he did make. But it seems that given his outburst in the courtroom in which he said, this is unfair, to paraphrase him, you all are not paying attention to the lived experiences of people. There's a lot of sympathy out here for him. Free Luigi is trending on Amazon. People have printed up T-shirts and all kinds of memorabilia. They're supporting him. And they're not supporting the murder. They're supporting someone striking a blow and sounding the bell on what is happening in privatized health insurance in the United States of America. Let's talk about it, everybody. You wrote, Brian R. Thompson, Executive Vice President of United Health Group and CEO of its insurance division, was shot to death in New York City on Wednesday. People have a suspect in custody, Mr. Luigi. And you say at the outset, the first thing you said to me when I called you a few days ago, you said murder is awful. You say murder is a terrible crime. A member of your family was brutally murdered by a stalker several years ago. And even though the murderer was captured and imprisoned quickly, our family's anguish, loss, and fury will never fully subside, and everyone can understand that. You said you didn't know Brian Thompson. Healing and stealing's deepest sympathies go out to his loved ones, and I think we have to say that, everybody. Yet you continue, the horror of his death and our sympathy for his family's pain should not obscure the fact that Brian Thompson's life was extinguished by gunfire while he led a company that maimed and killed thousands of people simply by mailing letters while keeping billions of dollars. His victims paid him and his company to take care of them. I want you to talk to me about that because I've been trying to examine John Canham Klein, this insurance industry. And I said, it almost, they make money by denying us claims because they make money by investing the money that we put in their companies. It's almost like health insurance delivery. Healthcare is like a secondary, their secondary job. It's a secondary task. It seems like their primary task is to make money. But help me with this. What do you mean by this? I mean, because you expressed sympathy for Thompson and his family correctly. But then you said, but wait a minute, United Healthcare, this group harms people without firing a weapon. John?
So, yeah, I mean, and it's, all of that. Each paragraph that you read was really heartfelt. We did have a family member unspeakably violently murdered in our family, and it broke everybody's hearts. And, I don't believe that murdering an individual executive is a legitimate path to social justice, right? But what this is doing, I think, is exposing to the very few people who have power in our society who wanted to pretend that it's not the case, how badly broken our health insurance system is, and how the political leadership with power in this country has entrusted an industry with the sacred obligation of paying for our medical care. And that industry is designed to make money and not to make sure we get paid for healthcare. So here's the business model of a health insurance company, or at least United Healthcare. They promise us that they will protect us from illness, injury, and death. You can't stop those things, but you can cure them, or you can make them better, or you can comfort us. And we pay them money, billions and billions of dollars worth of money, right? Based on that promise. Then they take that money and they put it in their pockets. And when we get sick, they say, well, whoops, nope, we're not going to pay for it. And they say that in a bunch of different ways. Before we even get to that part, though, they don't do their other job, which is to actually manage care. They're called managed care companies. It's an old phrase we don't use as much anymore. And part of that is like negotiating costs for us. They don't do it, prices go up. And so the insurance that we get already comes loaded up with huge deductibles, huge copays. And we talked about this on Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm.
That almost nobody can afford. So 48% of non-elderly adults, ages 19 to 64, 48% skipped healthcare because of out-of-pocket costs in the last year, according to a very recently released Commonwealth Fund study. Included in that are 36% of people that the Commonwealth Fund looked at and said, hey, you know what? You're well insured. You're covered. More than a third of people that, one of the expert NGOs says are well insured, including millions of people well insured by United Healthcare, also just can't afford to get their healthcare. That's one piece of it, right? They don't manage costs, and the plans that they sell us are garbage. They're not real protection. But if you get sick and you decide, okay, I can swallow my copay, I can swallow my deductible, I'm going to go get healthcare, they'll still say no, right? And they say no in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways is what's called prior authorization. So for a lot of different kinds of care, even though they promise to pay for your medical care, they tell you and your doctor, oh no, we have to approve it first. And you'll have situations where, I think I spoke about this before. So for example, I had knee surgery earlier this year. My doctor is extremely prominent. He used to be the official courtside doctor of the US Open tennis tournament. And my insurance company said, nope. Like, I don't know who the doctor was who reviewed that, right? So we had to go through this whole rigmarole. I wrote a letter. I spent a couple of days trying to figure it out. We eventually won. But there's this enormous, huge obstacle. And
well, let me ask you this. While you're writing the letters, you're having to live. I mean, something as simple as having to get up to go relieve yourself in the restroom. And if a joint is hurting, that's a calculation. I mean, I want to kind of help people to see.
Let's dig in. Look, my surgery, I was fine. I was in a significant amount of pain, but it was the limiting of daily activity that was really dangerous, right? I couldn't exercise. I couldn't do other stuff. Your health is going to deteriorate. It wasn't life-saving. Here's another story that I wrote about in a piece, right? So, United Health has a lot of CEOs, right? Thompson was the CEO of their insurance division, executive vice president of parent company. Well, back in 2018, he was still only the CEO of just their Medicare and Medicaid plans, right? Their government plans. And early in 2018, a United Health plan denied a woman named Carrie Ann Lucas a prescription for an inhaled antibiotic. Now, Ms. Lucas was a really prominent disability rights leader, a great fighter. And lived with multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes, and a number of other healthcare conditions. And so she ended up taking a less expensive antibiotic because of the denial. She had a reaction, which triggered a bunch of other problems, and she ultimately died in 2019. Right? That's mine is minor, right? I mean, my case is an example of having to spend a lot of time and wasting the time of a prominent doctor who also has to do all this other work. In her case, it's fatal, right? Or at least allegedly, right? I did not actually interview her at the time, but there was good coverage of it in Forbes magazine, right? So, and this happens all over the place, right? I mentioned those surveys where half of adults say that they skip needed medical treatment because of cost. 40% of those people, 40% of them told the Commonwealth Fund researchers that because they skipped care, their medical conditions got worse. We're talking about millions of people here now, right? Millions and millions of people who skipped medical care because of cost, including millions of people who skip medical care who supposedly have good health insurance because of cost, and a huge chunk of whose medical conditions got worse, right? That means that you're inflicting harm on people, right? And you're ultimately potentially killing people. And there's no doubt that people die because they can't get the healthcare they need because of the money. All which might make sense, maybe, if we were a poor society and had no money to spend on healthcare. The reality is, United and other companies like United have been given the responsibility and accepted the responsibility for financing healthcare in a system where we spend twice as much per person as other wealthy countries. And in most of those other countries, you don't have anything like the situations I've described, either for myself, for Carrie Ann Lucas, or for anybody else, right? That's the thing, right? Okay, somebody's got to run a system. Fine. We've decided that profit-making corporations are going to run the system and finance it. And the result has been, right, a system in which the people responsible for financing our care promise us that we'll be covered, promises that we'll be protected, take our money, and then refuse to spend it. First, they take our money for plans that don't actually allow us to get healthcare. And even when we grit our teeth and go and try to use our benefits, they won't let us use it. And people get sick, people get hurt. Medical conditions that might be treatable become much worse. And some of those folks die. That's what I mean when I call a denial letter, right, an attempted murder letter, right? Because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Right? People die and are caused harm by other people in a lot of different ways, not simply by gunshots. Again, none of this in any way justifies pulling out a gun and shooting some guy in the back on the streets of New York City. Like that's fundamentally wrong. And I mean, the justice system is going to do what the justice system is going to do. But what I think has happened is those facts that I just described have been normalized in the society by the people who run the industry and by the politicians who allow them to run the industry and by the media that covers the industry. And, in the media's case, I'll say this, you had asked about the coverage of Mangione. I've been surprised at how kind of all over the place it is. I expected a lot more of just straight up, it's horrible. Why can anybody celebrate a murder? I think I've seen a lot of that kind of coverage, like it's outrageous, it's sickening. I've also seen a lot of people say, look, you shouldn't murder people. But if people don't understand the anger at the healthcare industry, they're missing what's actually happening here. Right. And so setting aside the individual case, right, people are furious. They're hurt. They've lost loved ones. And I was, just before I came on, I was reading a Business Insider piece about this, which started off with like, gosh, this seems outrageous. And then they went through and actually interviewed a bunch of people who said, yeah, I don't support murder, but look at what's happening here, including a former vice president of Western Union. Right? Because this doesn't just affect only the poorest among us, right? It affects everybody. I don't talk to anyone in my daily life, with a few exceptions. Most of those are union members who have tremendous coverage, right? Because they've fought and they've sacrificed their wages for it. But almost even those folks have family members and other people who've gone through similar experiences. Everybody has dealt with this. The system doesn't work. And they just keep so much money, right? If we were an underfinanced healthcare system, if we didn't spend money on healthcare, it would be wrong, and I'd be out there fighting for us to spend more, right? But that's not what happens here. What happens here is we spend twice as much money per person, and we get less healthcare than people in other wealthy countries. And I say that every time I talk to anybody about this industry, over and over and over again, because it's very hard for that to actually sink in. But we know it, like ordinary people know it. And that's what you're seeing. And of course, sure, social media is not the world, right? And people are at their most inflammatory on social media. Okay, that's fine. But the reaction, I think, is a little different than a lot of people in New York and Washington and other places might have expected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality here is this is an emperor's new clothes moment.
What do you mean by that?
It doesn't work. Everyone in the country knows it doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
but people with power are pretending it does.
Well,
Right?
I think that's what you're seeing as you're seeing some of the coverage bend toward. You got to understand the anger, because all of the coverage said, "Look, initially,
Mhm.
this is a horrible thing, and these people are horrible, and look at what's happening on social media." In the meantime, CNN's coverage of election night in 2020, 13.3 million people. 2024, a little bit more than 800,000 people. People have turned away from this.
That's right.
That's why I encourage you
Mhm.
to go to Substack and subscribe to Healing and Stealing. This is John Canham Klein's Substack, Healing and Stealing. You need to get this and get more information. Hello, Shadow Star Ace and Andre and Mike and everybody else. And please share this, like and share this show, like and share this show. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, because I think that, as before we welcome Anthony Grasso to the show, I want what you're doing is, as you bring up these stories, I think that's why you see Free Luigi trending.
Yeah.
I mean, no one. I mean, and I just spoke with one of my dearest friends this morning. Her sister was murdered
So
yesterday.
sorry.
It's horrible. It is horrible. I said, so this is, I mean, this is not some, this is like someone who's like a sister to me. I'm like, wait a minute, what happened? Because she's dealing with another major illness in the family. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait, what? She said, no, 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 not her, her. And it's awful. That having been said, there's something here that has, I'm hoping that this can be an inflection point, maybe a turning point. Do you think that now? I mean, because it seems like he might have, people are trying to figure out, well, was he on his way someplace else? It appears that he might have been. You know, you tell. I mean, do you think that we that the single payer system now has someone's attention?
Well, that's a great question, Santita. And you know, I'll echo Dr. Himmelstein from the other day.
Mm.
I hope we're at an inflection point. I think also that our economic and political system has shown great resilience against popular anger and frustration. I'll say this: what I think is interesting is that there is the anger against the health insurance industry is not purely partisan.
Mm-mm.
And it's not. And I mean, God forbid, never ever hold me responsible for my kids' political views, right? But Mangio's father is a Republican state senator in Maryland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem we face is that
And
how awesome.
they own a very conservative radio station that is
That's
very
right.
big in Baltimore.
That's right. That's right. So, and again, people have different views than their parents, and people
Mhm.
definitely do very different things than their parents do, right? But I think the point here is that, like, if you look around, you'll see business executives saying, "Okay, yeah, don't murder people, but you have no idea how horrible the system is and how horrible it was to me or to my family." So, I think, but if one hopes for an inflection point, I think that the challenge that we're going to face is that a lot of the problems have actually been covered by the big media. And I think this is the thing that we discussed earlier. And really, one thing I want to strongly emphasize: you can pick up the New York Times, and you can pick up any sort of major news organization will have done some kind of deep investigation of some portion of the healthcare industry, including of United Health, right? The problem is that coverage is often framed as, look at this terrible thing, not this whole system doesn't work. And you're going to get what you're seeing in this horrible expose over and over and over and over and over and over again, because it doesn't work. It's structured wrong. The incentives are wrong. I mean, I made a point in my piece today. Brian Thompson was paid $30 million over 3 years to be the CEO of the insurance division of United Healthcare. Okay. 90% of that compensation was paid to him for trying to hit profit targets, which means that every denial letter sent to patients that patients didn't successfully fight and get health care paid for, that was money in his pocket, right? I mean, it's true in any situation, but he got only $1 million a year in base salary. And the rest of his payment, the rest of his compensation was in these incentives where there's enormous pressure to actually do it. Now, I don't think we can fix our system by getting rid of those incentives and saying, let's just pay these guys $10 million in flat salary, right? The point here is that the incentives here are completely wrong. They don't work. Their job, look, insurance means pooling risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about insurance is pooling risk, right? We'll get all the money together, and then when someone needs some, we'll pay it out to them. Like it's the same is true for every insurance thing. Well, corporations try to avoid risk, right? So we've tried to, for example, we've had to pass a law saying no pre-existing condition exclusions, right? How's that working out? You have a pre-existing condition now, you get covered, but you get a denial when you actually got to go get care for it, right? Every time that there's one of these small examples of what's wrong with the system, the answer is going to be whack one more mole. The reality here is like, you're not going to fix this system by tweaking the regulation of an organization like United Health. Like, you're not going to do that. They're too big, they're too powerful, and they don't care. And their business model is to make money. And their customers, by the way, are less us and more employers, right? Oh, I mean, employers are going to negotiate benefits on behalf of what? 25 people, 50 people, 100 people, right? You have 6 million employers trying to be experts in buying healthcare, going up against United Healthcare, and by the way, going up against the big hospitals too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because the reality here is, this is one of the big secrets of the industry, and I hope this is not too technical a point, but we pay United Health and the insurers to negotiate on our behalf, right? They're supposed to go out and get the network and get the rates from the big hospitals, right? Want to know the secret? They don't care. Why? Because if you're an employer, it's a pain in the neck to change insurance plans, right? It's not like going out and buying a different candy bar from some other place for a nickel less. It's really a pain in the neck. So insurers will come back to you with premiums that go up twice the rate of inflation all the time. And they'll be like, okay. So the prices go up. They pretend that they're outraged by hospital monopolies. They don't really care. And the reason for that is 25% of $500 billion is a lot more money than 25% of $250 billion, right? And so the big secret is, like, when I say it doesn't work, it doesn't work. They don't care about the things we think they're supposed to care about and do for us, and they're not going to.
Well, it doesn't work for us. It works for them. And,
oh, yeah, big time.
I'm like, the way because as I started thinking about this, I said, I had to step back and say, wait a minute, because I've had to deal with rejection and getting medicines that were not what my doctor prescribed.
That's right.
And then having a fight on my hands because I'm like, wait a minute, no, because I don't know what that is. There's a reason this is generic, and there's a reason that this is the name brand. And I'm not talking about buying shoes or a purse, okay, or a dress from a specific designer. No. We're talking about something I've got to put in my body to make me well. And this fight is this is crazy. And so when I hear this young man say, wait a minute, his outburst, you know what? It's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Before I bring up Anthony Grasso, because he's bringing up another issue as we're looking at this true crime. I feel like we need a new magazine because this is true crime. This is really what it is. What we're seeing is the difference between, number one, he's alive. Okay. And so many Black people I have seen and Latinos who I've seen online, they've said, you know what? It's a good thing that he was white, because not light skinned. As the media tried, I said, you've got to be joking. Are you going to make him light skinned now? Really? Oh, this is crazy. He's alive. And the
Right.
way we look at street crimes and corporate crimes, completely different.
Oh, totally. Always
And,
has been.
and that's what this discussion is. It's like, because this to me is corporate crime, but it's also street crimes. I'm living with this.
Yeah.
I'm living with this, and this is awful. This is awful. And and I just think that this is like pulling something. This is pulling it out. And I don't, and you and I both said, wait a minute, murder? No, you don't want to see that. But sadly, he's gotten our attention. Because I mean, I was just seeing the governor of Pennsylvania, as I bring you up, Anthony Grasso. The governor of Pennsylvania, he was lecturing everybody about murder and how awful it was, right? And you know what he did? I saw him signing a missile that was going to go to Gaza. I said, "Are you serious? How are you going to lecture me on murder, and you're doing this? And how is it that I'm going to have all of these anchors on television and all of these pundits and all of the discussions? No one's mentioning the pain that people are feeling." I mean, I brought up your knee surgery because, my back has gone out.
Oh,
And you got
sorry.
to figure, I mean, and you got to calculate how much water can I drink? I'm thirsty, but it's going to take me an hour to get out of bed because I have no mobility. And this is how some people are living like this. So, I think it's awful. But what people are also living with, John, is the difference in how he's been viewed, because he comes from an affluent family. He is clearly a brilliant student, Ivy Leaguer. This is corporate crime. So there was, really an aura of respectability that was around this. I want to introduce you to Anthony Grasso, because I came across his information today and I said, oh, I want you all to meet, because he has a new book, Dual Justice: America's Divergent Approaches to Street and Corporate Crime. And John Canham Klein, this is someone, Anthony Grasso, it's wonderful to meet you.
Good to meet you too. And thanks for having me on.
Professor, it is wonderful to be with you. And this is my very old and dear friend, John Canham Klein, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. You've got to go to his Substack, Healing and Stealing. But he is someone who has been really iconic in the union movement. He and Reverend Jesse Jackson and Bernie Sanders and others have worked with him down through the years. And so we've been talking about just how the insurance industry is structured, because, John has been educating us for the past few days about this. These are questions that people are asking, when you find out that you make money from rejecting my entreaty for help. So, John, if you would hang around for a bit, because I want
Sure, love to.
What your thoughts
Great
are
to meet you
here.
too, by the way.
Good to meet you as well, John.
Well, talk to me, because we've seen this outburst in the courtroom today, in which Mr. Mangione said, "Look, this is unfair. You are not paying attention to the lived experiences of people." I mean, just to paraphrase him. But many African Americans, many Black people have said, you know what? First of all, Dylan Roof shot up a church full of Black people. They took him to Burger King first.
Right.
George Floyd, they said he had a counterfeit bill. He gets choked to death in front of the store, in front of everybody. So talk to me about this dual system. I mean, I mean, it's almost like a schizophrenia that we have. Or maybe I don't want to exaggerate, but that's the way it's coming across to me.
No, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I get you. And I think the punchline of it, right, is that in America, we generally understand harmful conduct that we could call criminal very differently, depending on who commits it and how and where it manifests, right? So street crime, street criminal violence, right? Usually committed by people who are poor, people of color. We understand that as something that's reflective of some sort of personal moral failing, right? A pathology of the person. It requires punishment, a harsh, stern response. But in corporate boardrooms, the American response and the American public's interpretation has long been, and what's long been sold to us by lawmakers, is that the harms that corporate decision makers inflict on the public are unfortunate byproducts of, right, doing business, of the entrepreneurial spirit, right? If corporate executives step too far out of line and really cause some harm, it's not their personal moral failings that did it. It's just their business zeal took a step too far, and we just need to rein them in a teeny little bit, right? I think I heard the tail bit of the conversation you were having with John before. You were talking about, right, the pre-existing condition regulations imposed back in 2010, right? It's a sort of thing where it's like, oh, well, okay, maybe they went a little overboard in terms of trying to pursue profits. We'll rein them in a little bit. And we understand the harms that are therefore coming from corporate decision makers very differently from the harms on the street. But when you look at what's been happening in response to Brian Thompson's murder, right? You know, I'm sure you've talked all about this, right? The laughing emojis on the Facebook post from United Healthcare, commemorating him, all the grim jokes online. It reflects this sort of understanding that people have where they're suddenly confronting this or reckoning with this very ugly truth that, hey, a public shooting and the denial of healthcare coverage are both uniquely American forms of violence. Right? Violence inflicted on you on the street is one thing. It's visceral, it's immediate, it prompts that response calling for, harsh justice. But violence can be inflicted on you from a corner office just as easily too, right? Behind opaque decision makers and whatever algorithmic processes an insurance company uses to determine whether or not you're going to get coverage or not. So I think this is a sort of a flashpoint, right? An inflection point where we're starting to say, hey, maybe the crimes that we see committed on the street aren't quite as different as we've long assumed them to be from the crimes that are committed in these corporate offices and corporate boardrooms. And maybe that's where some of this response is coming from.
Well, but that is why I wanted you to meet John Canham Klein, because on his Substack, Healing and Stealing, which has cracked my father up to no end today, and I'm so glad you brought some humor to him today. And not a gallows humor, but he said, because this really is, somebody's got to deal with this. And this latest piece from him is American murder weapons, because these are murder weapons too, but no one wants to acknowledge, which is what you're saying. I mean, corporate crime it's not even insidious. It is, corporate crimes get you put out of your home.
Yes.
Corporate crimes give you NAFTA. These people can't make enough money. It's just, and I'm trying to, what is our takeaway as we look at this young, affluent, brilliant young man, full of so much promise? He has seen something, everybody. And I am not, and I will continue to say, I am not someone who will ever believe that murder is the way. My parents worked for Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King for the princely sum of $75 a week. I believe in nonviolence. That having been said, I also know if you push people too far, and this is what we're seeing now. I'm not making excuses for people, but I sure am trying to understand. I'm trying to understand this. And I know that when the crime is corporate, you don't serve time, Anthony.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So one of the things about corporate crime that we that I try to always point out to folks is that things that are often labeled as corporate crime aren't always treated as such, in part because of the sort of labyrinthian regulatory systems we have that oversee corporate crime, right? Obviously, federal regulators do a lot of important work, but if you look at debates over, these sort of historical moments where we start to say, hey, corporate crime is a big problem, right? Right after the Great Depression, right? In the late 19th century when we're dealing with the rise of railroads, right? Following the S&L crisis, all these moments where corporate crime suddenly is on the radar. Look at these federal debates. What ends up happening is lawmakers contemplate criminal controls. Then we get these same ideas put forward. Well, these guys aren't the same as those immoral criminals. They're just good businessmen who made a few mistakes. Every time we ratchet back those controls, ratchet back the criminal controls, and we adopt these sort of regulatory systems, right, to oversee behavior that we do label as crime, right? But regulatory bodies, the FDA, the SEC, again, they all do important work, but they have all kinds of discretion to oversee crimes that are behavior that's labeled as crime through all sorts of alternative tools. So then when we look at someone like Brian Thompson, we say, look, his record's totally clean, right? He hasn't done anything wrong. But in reality, if you dig under the surface, a lot of the things that these companies are doing, right, that are arguably causing tremendous harm to the public are kind of buried underneath all of these layers of regulations so that we just don't see them, right? And it makes for a very sharp contrast for those crimes on the street, right? Where someone commits one crime, police swarm the scene, the system gears into motion and throws them behind bars, throws the book at them, right? So it's two very different systems of justice we have to manage two different kinds of crime committed by different kinds of people, right, so to speak.
Well, but that is the point, John. I'd like for you to respond to that, because that was the point you were making in your new post on healing and stealing, because you were saying, well, no, corporate America they might not use guns per se, but their methods are just as deadly. John Canham Klein.
Yeah, look, Anthony, those are really great points. I think when healthcare, there's one step further back, which is there's an enormous amount of behavior by in the healthcare industry, which ought to be criminal and take some work to even find anything in the statute book that says it's really illegal. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that is technically illegal, but there's no enforcement of it and there's no consequences for anybody to do it, right? And I've written about this before, where you always have the next big thing in healthcare, right? It was surprise bills, right? Then for a while it's deductibles, it's this and it's that. And inevitably what happens is you get a piece of regulation that's not criminal in nature, as Anthony said. And, the regulators will go in and then they issue a plan of correction. And then maybe someday a very small monetary fine. And the system just grinds on. And then there are outraged hearings. And then they pass another very minor regulation, and you go through the same process over and over and over and over again. The reality here is that healthcare is a public good. It needs to be controlled by the public. Mm-hmm. And frankly, our representatives that we elect to do that don't do it. And both parties, frankly, are deeply committed to a system that allows private insurers to run the healthcare system and pay for it, and refuses to force allegedly charitable hospitals to behave as if they're charities, right? And so we have what we have at the moment, which is a healthcare system unlike anywhere else in the world. I think it was either you or David said the other day, Santita, like, I talked to people in Europe and I asked them, how many people do you know who have medical debt? And they're like, what are you talking about?
They look at you like you're crazy.
Right.
You try to pay your doctor in Europe.
That's
the doctor looks at you like you're an alien. Like, wait a minute. I'm a doctor. This is what I do. You're sick.
So Anthony's point is a really good one. And frankly, there's one political party in this country who wants to get after criminality in healthcare, right? Their idea of criminality is a person who's on Medicaid gets a job, waits 3 months to actually change their coverage, and goes and gets a visit to a doctor. The doctor bills Medicaid, and that's fraud, right? And like that's so. And those folks, by the way, are going to wind up in jail. And right, and so I think the challenge here, right, is as Anthony said, is that there is a two-tier justice system. There's justice for the people who are doing most of the stealing and not a lot of the healing. And there's justice for the rest of us.
Yeah. And if I can just jump on that real quick, I think that's the perfect way to state it, right? When I look at these dual justice systems, right, I think both of them, right, are failing us in that neither one addresses the structural problems that actually cause harm in either setting, right? What is it that causes the root causes of street crime, whether it's inequality, disenfranchisement, lack of opportunity? Punitive approaches are never going to solve that, right? It's going to leave those in place and create and perpetuate this cycle of crime and violence and inequality and keep it alive. And on the other side, right, to exactly your point, right, the United States stands alone among developed nations in treating healthcare as a market commodity, right? Adopting more regulation is going to do the same thing and perpetuate the problems in the corporate world, right? If we really want to address corporate crime, right, it's not going to be, let's just punish all the bad actors, or, let's just tweak some regulations on the market spheres a little bit more. Neither one of those is going to fix the problems that we have, right? What's going to fix it is understanding that healthcare and lots of other things that we treat as commodities are basic human rights that need to be nationalized and treated differently, right? And we have to attack kind of the incentive structure, the misaligned incentives that treats healthcare through the lens of profit maximization and shareholder value maximization. It's never going to work.
Well, Snowman says white collar crime is more expensive than street crime. I think that's one of when people look back at, really the post 2008 moment, we wanted Wall Street to be held accountable for what they did to us, our jobs, our houses, all going up in smoke. And that did not happen. But they still have the patina of, no, they still have not just the aura, they still are respectable. But the welfare, you still have the welfare queen, right? Someone who is not getting rich, she's eating. I mean, and you've got, I'm trying to figure out how we, as we look at these, I mean, because justice really, there are dual tracks.
Yeah.
And because let me ask you this, and I open this to both of you. What if he'd been black? No, I mean, no, really, what if he'd been black and poor, like the movie John Q that we talked about with Denzel Washington that was out more than 20 years ago. He was working class. He had a wife who was working class. He worked in the factory. His wife was a waitress. They had a wonderful family. Their son, they went to the Little League game. The son falls out. When they got him to the hospital, they said, no, your son needs a new heart. Turns out he couldn't afford it. He said, I work hard every day. I'm doing everything I can. My wife and I. What do you mean? He's not going to get high up on the list. Bottom line, he held the hospital hostage. But he did become a folk hero. You remember that, John? The movie.
I've seen the movie, yep.
And, but that was, of course, that was Hollywood. It was Denzel. And so it made it, palatable. But one of my dearest friends, may she rest in peace, we walked out of the movie and we said, we are a generation away from this happening here. And what if someone poor, would they get this attention? Would we be talking about healthcare and this system this way? Anthony Grasso.
I think we'd be telling a very different story. I think that we know what police violence looks like, right? Across racial and class boundaries. I think we'd be telling a very different story. I don't know if he'd be alive right now, right? It would certainly look very different. And he probably would not have gotten the attention, right? We're dealing with someone here who's got this Ivy League education, extremely privileged, right? So knows how to use the megaphone, I guess.
But Anthony, I think that sometimes it takes someone who has all of this privilege to look at things differently. That happens too now. Because they can become the champions of those who are underserved. And so there's something that he has seen in his lived experience where he's looking at this very differently. He's not approaching it as my father says, from the mansion down, but from the manger up.
Right, yeah. A nightmare experience with the American healthcare system, I think, is a pretty universal experience at this point. So,
well, last week we weren't talking about that. John Kennedy.
Santita, you asked me if we were at an inflection point, and I hesitated, obviously. And the reason for that is that, I suspected we were at such a point after 2008, as you made that point. And of course, no one went to jail because it wasn't street crime and it wasn't a working class African-American guy, right? It was guys in suits, right? But I do think what is interesting about the current moment is the degree to which the frustration with the, murder by letter that happens in the healthcare industry goes beyond the folks who suffered the most in our system. Because we know that people of color are more likely to be uninsured and underinsured. They work in low-wage jobs. And when people are skipping healthcare, you look at that data and you find that guess who's skipping more healthcare, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in this instance, there's a trickle up process of the harm caused by our healthcare industry. People are terrified to go get a new job.
Oh yeah.
Right? People are they're afraid to do things that might make them sick or get hurt, and they
And they
they
work
can't
sick.
afford it.
They work
Yeah,
sick
they
because
work sick all the time.
I can't go to the doctor because
Yep,
my deductible, and I don't know what else
that's
is
right.
happening in my family. I mean,
Yeah, and I don't have sick days, and yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
Yep, it's just. So in this sense, I think if we begin to see some change in sort of the politics of healthcare, I think one of the things that will be driving that is that I'm sad to say that it's had to the most grievous harm in this system has had to migrate out of the people that we usually get away with doing harm to in society to a broader population. I will say this, my piece about Brian Thompson. At the end, I make a critical point. Right, he didn't only make $30 million, but he and his cronies pour money into politics so that they can retain the right to loot Medicare, and they can stop things like single payer Medicare for all. And that's a bipartisan function, by the way. It's not. It is not. This ain't a Republican issue. To the extent that Democrats are willing to do anything, it always has to come with additional subsidy to the private health insurance industry and the maintenance of that system, right? Medicare Advantage has expanded rapidly under both Republican and Democratic presidents, right? Which is driving people absolutely crazy. And meanwhile, both parties have allowed Medicare itself to degenerate, right? I mean, one of the reasons that people go expose themselves to a company like United Health is that the core Medicare program isn't that good. It costs way too much money, and that terrifies people. And so they have to make this awful choice between slightly better coverage, but the risk of getting a denial, and the wide open cost sharing in Medicare. And so I think part of what we need to do is hold our political leaders accountable to the vision that Anthony and I were laying out earlier, which is this is the public good. And it has to be treated as something that we all collectively own and doesn't exist for people like Thompson or anybody else to make money. And I think that's the standard by which we have to measure legislative attempts to make the system better, and not. And I just thought, Anthony, your description of how the regulations work was brilliant, right? And not replicate that process of trying to regulate narrowly things that we know aren't working at a big picture level.
What's your final word, Anthony Grasso? Not that you will not be on the show again, because you've got to come back, because this book, and I hope you put it under your Christmas tree, everybody, Dual Justice: America's Divergent Approaches to Street and Corporate Crime. This is something that we talk about all the time, but I think John Canham Klein, we're so accustomed to it that we've adjusted to it. My father often says that, slavery in and of itself is awful. It's onerous, yes, but what's worse is when you adjust to it. And just period. Whenever you adjust to that which is unjust, that becomes a problem. And that's when because we're being slow walked into so much, and we're accustomed to being treated like we're nobody, but we are somebody.
Yeah.
Anthony Grasso.
Yeah, I think that we kind of take some of these ideas about the difference between street and corporate crime as common sense assumptions that we all just live with, and to what you all were talking about before about whether now is a sort of an inflection point, or the degree to which it's an inflection point. I know, John, you were saying you have some skepticism about that, and I do too. I mean, we just elected Donald Trump, right? So I don't want to dive too deep into the weeds of research and stuff, but in brief, one of the punchlines about what I argue in my book is when we look at these differing ways we conceptualize and perceive street criminality as pathology and corporate crime as sort of a product of the entrepreneurial spirit, it dates back way in American history, all the way to the 19th century and all the way to the eugenics movement, right? When we said certain people were genetically superior to others. Street criminals were pathologically criminal. They were terrible. Lock them up. The robber barons, they're doing some bad stuff, but they have a natural entrepreneurial spirit. That's what their genetics are, right? They're much better. We don't want to punish them too hard, right? And that's sort of where some of these ideas took suit. And if you look at Donald Trump, right, what does he say, right? A few months ago, he gave an interview. I can't remember exactly what the show was, but I'm sure you can find it somewhere. He says, right, murderers, I think murderers, it's in their genes. It's in their genes. And if you read his book, The Art of the Deal, what does he say? He says, I think deal making, it's in your genes, right? So these assumptions, right, are still alive. And we have someone who we just elected who's very explicitly and happy to embrace them. So we're looking at sort of the debate here over Luigi Mangione and Brian Thompson, and how much is it an inflection point, and maybe it'll spark some helpful discussions in the realm of healthcare. But I wish I could be more optimistic about the long-term trajectory we have on street and corporate crime more generally. And I think hopefully the book helps shed some light on that.
Well, I hope so, because we do get fatigued now, don't we?
Yeah.
We do. I mean, we saw that after Hurricane Katrina. John Canham Klein, your final word before we go?
Look, this the disconnect between the people with power in this country and everybody else has grown so rapidly with the growth of inequality. And I think so many of us have internalized the injustices as normal. And I think our media and our political leaders really work hard to make us do that. If there's a moment of optimism about the murder of Brian Thompson, it's that the fact that a lot of people are no longer willing to at least publicly say they accept this thing as normal is at least something positive to come out of an awful crime and thousands and thousands and thousands of awful crimes that happen, as Anthony said, or instigated, as Anthony said, in a corner office.
Everybody go to the Healing and Stealing Substack. Guns and Letters, not Guns and Roses, Guns and Letters. American Murder Weapons, How a United Health Group Harms Patients Without Firearms. And Anthony Grasso's book, equally as profound. I think you all are kind of on the same track today. Dual Justice, America's Divergent Approaches to Street and Corporate Crime. Some people fire bullets, others do not. They're all just as deadly, everybody. I hope that we are at an inflection point. We have a lot of questions that we need to answer. Are we going to be a democracy or a corporatocracy? I mean, will the republic survive? And that's not Trump. That's us now. We've got the leadership that we voted for or didn't vote for. And now it's time for everybody to get to work. We've got to make the American project work, but that's on us. It works if and when we work it. So let's get out here, everybody. Let's get to work and pay attention to this trial and pay attention to what this young man has to say and pay attention to all of the comments that we're seeing in social media and at your water cooler. And let's take these comments, and let's move forward with them, because we all deserve healthcare. We need to change our view of it. It's a right. It shouldn't be a privilege. You should not have to fight for this. And, my pastor would say there are no little big I's and little U's. Everybody matters. And a crime is a crime. When Wall Street rapes you, so to speak, that's as bad as someone coming upon you and taking advantage of you. People have lost their homes. People have lost their livelihoods. There's so much that has happened. And we can't shrug that off, everybody. Don't adjust to that. Let's talk about Sonia Massey in the next hour. Speaking of crime, I guess this is a true crime day. And Daniel Penny, the police officer who shot her, well, he, before the trial, is free to walk. And Daniel Penny, a veteran, choked someone who was clearly struggling, choked him to death. And he walked too. What does that say about us? Let's talk about it on the Santita Jackson Show back in just a minute on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Gentlemen, you are the